Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Chatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha. Paritanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yes, so the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita is titled Karma Yoga. And, well, of course, the subject is basically that, although as we have mentioned on a number of occasions already, Srila Prabhupada has this practice, and it's very important too, of connecting everything basically with devotional service, with direct Krishna consciousness. So even though the chapter's titled Karma Yoga, and that term Karma Yoga is used here and there in the verses, Srila Prabhupada is bringing out devotional service very often, at least, practically always, but very often at least. Because after all, that is the message of Bhagavad Gita. To become Krishna's devotee, think of him, serve him. Yes. And ultimately that is found in every verse. So on Tuesday evening, we did read the introduction, and we did go over the outline of the sections. I think I will just repeat the outline of the sections, just to make sure everyone's got it. So first of all, well, there are 5 sections. The first is verses 1 and 2, and the title is, the subject matter is confusion, renunciation, or work. What to do? Important question. And of course, this question arises on the basis of the discussion in chapter 2, that first of all, from verse 11 to verse 30, Lord Krishna was discussing about the soul, how we're not this body, we're all eternal persons. We shouldn't be affected by heat and cold, etc. And there was not a lot of mention of acting. I mean, in some verses he did say, therefore fight. But he was really just touching on that idea, and it was more just a philosophical, analytical type of presentation. Yes, whereas after that was the section on karma kandya, that you're a kshatriya, so you just have to do your kshatriya duty. That was from verse 31 till, 37, I think. And then from 38 to 52, 53 was the discussion on Buddhi Yoga. And Buddhi Yoga, it also had that philosophical, analytical element to it, but it was also very much emphasizing acting, doing your duty. So there seems to be or at least Arjuna's taking it like that there's contradictions between these two. So he brings that out in verses 1 and 2. That's the first section. Then the second section is from verse 3 to verse 9. And the subject is fight. Do your duty without attachment. Yes. Anyway, as we go through, you'll see how the spiritual element, the analytical, philosophical element, it is there in the context of working, or in the case of Arjuna, fighting. Then the third section is from verse 10 to verse 16. And the subject matter there is going from karma kandya to karma yoga. From just doing your duty because that's the way you are. You just have that sort of physique and state of mind. So materially, you're a kshatriya pretty much. So just do your duty. That's karma kandya. So then elevation to karma yoga means you still do that duty, but in a renounced spirit. Ultimately renouncing for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So going from karma kandya to karma yoga, connecting it with the Lord. Then the fourth section is, it's an interesting section actually, verse 17 to 32. And the subject matter is acting in karma yoga to set a good example. In other words, you may not need for your own purification to do karma yoga. You may have already gone beyond it. But for the people in general, so they don't get the wrong idea, and just to inspire them to do the right thing, then do your duty in karma yoga just for their sake, to set a good example. And then the fifth section is from verse 36 to verse 42, which is the end of the chapter, and I call it, beware of lust and anger. Yes. All right, so let us just go straight in to the first section. From verse 1 to verse 2, those first couple of verses, and the subject, confusion, renunciation, or work. So Arjuna is confused. Some of us might feel, confused. Why is he confused? Some of us might question, why is he confused? From the second chapter, it seemed to be fairly clear. At least it seemed to be reasonably clear, but maybe it's just for our sakes that Arjuna is acting as if he's really not clear. He needs it to be spelt out for him. Do we just renounce everything on the basis of not being this body, spirit, soul, so we're not part of the material world, so we've got nothing to do in the material world? So is it a matter just of renunciation, or should we do buddhi yoga? Buddhi yoga, that term was used from verse 38 to 52 or so in the second chapter. And that buddhi yoga is basically a synonym, you could say, for karma yoga, doing your duty, but in the renounced spirit, not just the karma kandya, type of consciousness where you just do it anyway, just because it's your psychophysical nature. All right, so let us now have a look at verse 1. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare? If you think that intelligence is better than fruitive work. Because remember, the whole presentation about the nature of the soul from verse 11 to verse 30, such a famous part of Bhagavad Gita and very important part. It's really promoting the idea of intelligence, understanding what's best on the spiritual platform. But then from verse 31 to 37, it was all just work, fight, just do it, just because it's your physical nature. And then after that, 38 to 52 or so, was a sort of, what would you say, a bit of a hybrid of philosophy being there and working being there also. So Arjuna feels that there is a contradiction between what was discussed from verse 11 to 30, and then what was discussed from 30 to 37, and then from 38 to 52, where there was work involved in one way or another. So, yes, let's just briefly have a look at what's in the purport, just very briefly. It's perhaps more than anything, it's the clash between the instructions from verse 11 to verse 30 and then 31 to 37. Yeah, particularly. That's there. And then, from 38 on, there was the section or sections saying that no, karma kandya, we don't want karma kandya. Beware of the flowery sections of the Vedas promoting work in order to be elevated to heavenly planets. So, yeah, you can see how Arjuna could be confused. So you've got 11 to 30, it's analytical, the soul. 30 to 37, it's just fight, and it's really, there's no mention of the soul. Then 38 to 52, there's some sort of anti-varnashram, anti verses 31 to 37. Then it goes on to talk something about doing your duty in a renounced spirit. So, okay. So, what is your point, Krishna? This is the idea. And Srila Prabhupada elsewhere gives an explanation, or a little background. In Vrindavan, you'll find so-called devotees of Krishna living in seclusion and supposedly chanting Hare Krishna. In practice, it has been seen that such an artificial way of trying to become Krishna conscious does not make anyone advanced. They live in a secluded place and chant Hare Krishna, but when they come out, they are smoking. They cannot even give up tobacco, let alone the other enticements of the material world. When you become mature, then you may wish to try living in seclusion. So then verse 2, Arjuna says, my intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me, philosophical, analytical, or some version, some form of working, either just because I'm a Kshatriya or in some sort of somewhat renounced spirit, doing my duty, but without attachment. Yeah. And this word equivocal, it's not such a common English word, but if you analyze it, it's pretty simple. Equivocal, equally, speaking equally about two different things. So what is it? So Srila Prabhupada, in the purport here, let's see, where is it in the purport? Verse 2. Srila Prabhupada. Yes, right at the beginning. Prabhupada says, in the previous chapter, as a prelude to the Bhagavad Gita, many different paths were explained, such as Sankhya Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, control of the senses by intelligence, work without fruit of desire, and the position of the neophyte. This was all presented unsystematically. A more organized outline of the path would be necessary for action and understanding. Well, yeah, there's truth in that. It was sort of jumping around a bit, particularly, I would say, from verse like 38 to 53. It was jumping about a bit. Then even the last section about Stita Pragya, that was somewhat complicated. So the idea here is to just organize the concepts. Yeah, so really this chapter will try to sort out what is the actual process which should be applied, and not just give different options. Maybe do this, maybe do that, possibly something else, but really try and clarify. So of course Krishna was not trying. Prabhupada mentions actually in the purport, Arjuna therefore wanted to clear up these apparently confusing matters so that any common man could accept them without misinterpretation. Although Krishna had no intention of confusing Arjuna by any jugglery of words, Arjuna could not follow the process, follow what is the process, understand what's the process, either inertia or active service. So in other words, he's helping to clarify things for us, clearing the path of Krishna consciousness for all students who seriously want to understand the mystery of Bhagavad Gita. All right. So that's verse 2, and that's the first section. However, Srila Prabhupada, we have located interesting statements of Prabhupada along these lines. Let's just read these. Sometimes things appear contradictory to the student. In fact, the master, conversant in these matters, does not say anything contradictory. Sometimes the student will misunderstand and think there are contradictions. Therefore, students are advised to ask questions of the spiritual master, Tadvidi. They should understand the transcendental science. First of all, surrender, then question, then service. Yeah. If you simply question without surrender and don't render any service, then you're simply wasting your time. So now let's go into the second section from verse 3 to verse 9. Fight, do your duty without attachment. So basically here in this section, even in the first 2 or 3 or so verses just coming up right now, Lord Krishna is going to make it really clear what is the point, what is really the process which is being promoted and presented here in Bhagavad Gita. So let us read then verse 3. And just to bring out this point, to bring out the point that we've mentioned now a few times about how Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing devotional service and using the term devotional service and that sort of terminology, even at least oftentimes, even when Krishna is saying karma yoga, Prabhupada presents more in terms of bhakti yoga, devotional service, not simply karma yoga. All right, so let me read the verse itself. I mean the Sanskrit. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Lokismin Dvi Vidanishta Pura Prokta Mayanaga Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. So there you see, karma yoga, karma yogena means by karma yoga. And the translation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are 2 classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical, philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service. There you go. So, some of them, again, just refer back to the Sanskrit, some of them, jnana yogena sankhyanam, by philosophical, by some process of knowledge, philosophical speculation is Prabhupada's translation actually, or sankyanam, which refers to the empirical approach, analytical approach, or alternatively, karma yogena, by the process of karma yoga. But Prabhupada says some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service. Because this is the point of Bhagavad Gita. The point of Bhagavad Gita is not to do karma yoga. If someone is somehow or other not capable of taking to devotional service, real bhakti yoga, then to do karma yoga as an alternative under those circumstances, that's acceptable. That's good. I mean, it's a lot better than nothing, and that's for sure. But really, ideally, what is being promoted is devotional service. So, all right, let's just have a little look here at the purport. It's an important purport because this is really the first time that real comparisons are being made, at least between jnana yoga and karma yoga or bhakti yoga. So So Prabhupada refers to the second chapter, verse 39, which that was just the beginning of the section after the section on Karma Kandya, where just fight because you're a Kshatriya was the idea. So straight after that, the Lord explained two kinds of procedures, namely Sankhya Yoga and Karma Yoga, or Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi Yoga being an alternative translation of Karma Yoga. So Krishna, the idea here is Krishna is going to clarify these points, these two types of procedures. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So now we're going through the purport here, just step by step now. We'll go through in a little detail, not too much, but a little detail. So now Sankhya Yoga is the analytical study of the nature of spirit and matter, and it's for people who like to speculate. They're the Jnani type. They're the Jnani type. They like to speculate, some experimental knowledge, philosophizing, agitating the brain in somewhat speculative ways. Yes. So the other class is explained in the 61st verse of the second chapter. Just give me a moment. Let's just have a quick look at the 61st verse of the second chapter, just to reorient ourselves here, just quickly. 60, 3, 2, 1. Aha. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. Emphasis on fixing the consciousness on Krishna. All right. So in that verse, and plus in the 39th verse, there was mention also of the basic principles of Buddhi Yoga, Krishna consciousness, working. Let's just have a quick look at that 39th verse. Give me a couple of seconds. It really won't take long. In fact, I'm right there, right now. So in verse 39 in the second chapter, Krishna says, "Thus far, I've described this knowledge to you through analytical study, that's Sankhya or Jnana. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results, that's Buddhi Yoga or Karma Yoga. O son of Prita, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works." Yes, all right, so that's what we're getting into here. Serious business. We are getting into some serious business here. So, Prabhupada goes on then, so that if we act in Buddhi Yoga, we can be relieved from the bonds of action, Prabhupada says here in the purport, and there's no flaw in the process. And we should, as the 61st verse says to some degree, well, it does say, we should depend entirely on the Supreme, in brackets, or more specifically, Krishna. Yeah. Again, this is Prabhupada bringing out what is the deeper meaning, more specifically on Krishna. And in this way, the senses will be brought under control more easily than simply through that Sankhya Yoga or Jnana Yoga, that analytical study process. Yes. So actually what Prabhupada is doing, he's leading us up to the next couple of verses, which are just going to make it very clear that work in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, that's the process. Aha. So then after that, he emphasizes the point that actually what is going to really be recommended is actually a combination of the two, you could say. That you work. Work is sort of like the foundation, but you work in knowledge, in spiritual consciousness. So both the yogas are interdependent as religion and philosophy. Religion without philosophy is sentiment, or sometimes fanaticism, while philosophy without religion is mental speculation. Yes. So Prabhupada then goes on to say that, this is now down further, about, what would you say, 3/4 of the way down through the paragraph. The whole process is to understand the real position of the self in relation to the super self. The indirect process is philosophical speculation, by which gradually one may come to the point of Krishna consciousness. And note the use of the word may. He does not say one will come to the point. One may come. And the other process is directly connecting everything with Krishna in Krishna consciousness. Of these two, the path of Krishna consciousness is better because it does not depend on purifying the senses by a philosophical process. Krishna consciousness, in other words, devotional service itself, is itself the purifying process. And by the direct method of devotional service, it is simultaneously easy and sublime. How nice. That's wonderful. Okay, so we move on. Well, here's another thought from Srila Prabhupada. So we should not become religious. It is from a class on chapter 3, verse 3. So we should not become religious fanatics nor dry mental speculators. Both these classes of men are dangerous. They cannot make any advancement. You should be religious and also try to understand each and every line philosophically. We've seen many such philosophical speculators. They simply talk in the meetings and that's all. And if we examine their private character, it is less than ordinary. A person may be a nice speaker, but will that help you in your spiritual realization? On the other hand, if you chant Hare Krishna, it will give you immediate results. So that's based on this verse number 3 we've been looking at the last few minutes. Now, for you devotees who are doing Bhakti Shastri, we have a question here based on chapter 3, verse 3. Please listen carefully. We're going to quote you a verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 24, verse 83. Madhya Lila 24:83. Okay. If one follows the path of philosophical speculation, the absolute truth manifests himself as impersonal Brahman. And if one follows the path of mystic yoga, he manifests himself as the super soul. That's Madhya Lila 24:83. So you've got to learn that, because you're going to be asked a question that you've got these two processes mentioned here: empirical philosophical speculation and then devotional service. And depending on which of the two paths you follow, then the absolute truth manifests himself in either of two different ways: impersonal Brahman or the super soul, depending on which process you adopt. So, note that, devotees. And now we go on to verse 4. And here Lord Krishna really starts to bring out the point. He really starts bringing out the point. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. Interesting. So there are two processes, but actually they're one process: abstaining from work and renunciation. They're essentially one process, just looked at from slightly different perspectives. So that's pretty clear, that if you stop working, you can't expect to get free from reactions. And if you renounce everything, you can't really expect to attain perfection. Renounce everything means, in the sense of what we called, if you remember, Falgu Vairagya. Falgu Vairagya means you just reject things without any concern for what is their relationship with Krishna. Yeah, you just reject them in the sense that if I want to make spiritual progress, I can't be attached to these, I can't have these things around me. But actually the Krishna conscious renunciation, if you remember, Yukta Vairagya, means to see everything as the property of Krishna and then to try to use it in his service. Because it's his property. It's obvious. You should use it in the service of the Lord. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada did give an example. Yes, you could say it's an example. Someone loses something on the road. It may be some money. It might be a book or some item they bought in a shop. It's just something of that person's, but somehow it got left on the street, not thrown away, but just misplaced. So then you come along, and now what is the best thing for you to do? Is it to look around, see if anyone's looking, if anyone's watching, and if nobody is watching, quickly pick it up and zip off and even use it in Krishna's service, possibly. But basically to take it. Or is it better or correct to just leave it? It's not mine. It's nothing to do with me. I will carry on with my business and just leave it there. Or is the best thing to take that item and try to return it to the rightful owner, perhaps hand it in at the police station, for example. I mean, basically like that. You know, in a city, we don't necessarily expect people to go around and ask everyone if they lost some item. That would be complicated. But to take it and leave it with the police, that is the best thing to do. Yeah. So this is Yukta Vairagya, Krishna conscious renunciation. Use Krishna's property in Krishna's service. So, okay, so there's that verse, and let's just quickly have a bit of a look at the purport. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada seems to pretty much, at least to a fair degree, he talks about taking sannyas and it's mainly different misconceptions surrounding the idea of taking sannyas. Because what is being suggested here or mentioned here is essentially sannyas, abstaining from work, material activity, and renouncing. This is a type of sannyas position. So Prabhupada explains, without purification, one cannot attain success by abruptly adopting the fourth order of life, sannyas. And then here's a misconception in the next sentence. Some people, empirical philosophers, think that if you take sannyas or retire from fruitive activities, you become as good as Narayan. But Krishna, of course, he doesn't accept that. Without purification of the heart, sannyas will become a disturbance to life for the so-called sannyasi and for those he interacts with. And therefore we get, Prabhupada talks about it on a number of occasions, people who take some form of not Krishna conscious sannyas, Mayavad, some impersonal, not Krishna conscious sannyas. So they do that, but then after a while, they find that it's a real struggle to maintain it. So in some cases, they adopt some program, a program like some humanitarian activity, and they try to make it's just material. You're just doing something to help people's material bodies, but they try to, in clever ways, make it seem like it's a very renounced spiritual activity suitable for a real renunciate, a sannyasi, like service to man is service to God. It's a nonsense. Prabhupada pointed out on many occasions, service to man is service to man, and service to God is service to God. They're two different things. And if you want spiritual elevation, then you should do service to God. Yes, so this type of sannyas is not desirable, which the type of sannyas which is being referred to in verse 4, just kind of whimsically stopping work or whimsically trying to renounce. This is not recommended, but rather in the last part of the purport there, if someone takes to the transcendental service of the Lord, even if the person doesn't discharge all his material prescribed duties, like karmakandya duties, varnashram duties, still whatever he may be able to advance in the cause is accepted by the Lord. And Prabhupada quotes part of, do you remember what verse this is? Swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. That is chapter 2, verse 40. Even a slight performance of such a principle enables one to overcome great difficulties. Yes, so now we go on to verse 5, and this is just Krishna, Lord Krishna is now just taking it further, the same idea further. It's really powerful. Verse 5 is extremely powerful. Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he's acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. Well, there you go. Isn't that just like a really essential point? Even if you want to sit down and renounce and go to a sacred place and just sit there and meditate or something like that, you won't be able to do it unless you have already come to the elevated point of complete purification. As Prabhupada, we read, Prabhupada said, late in life, if someone has become so advanced, they could do like that. But otherwise, for your average person, your average devotee, or just your average anyone, everyone has a physical and psychological nature. That's there from our karma. From previous lives, from our upbringing in this life to some degree. These things mix together. Everyone has a psychophysical nature, we call it. And until you come to the point of real transcendence, a liberated, very fully liberated position, you cannot stop yourself from acting physically and psychologically according to the material nature you have acquired. As Krishna says, everyone is forced to act helplessly, according to the qualities he's acquired from the modes of material nature. And therefore no one can stop doing something. You have to do something, not even for a moment. There we can see that Lord Krishna, he's kind of intensifying. He's intensifying the presentation step by step. You cannot avoid working. But then there's, of course, the question of the consciousness in which you'll work. But you're going to have to work. Yes. So, and Srila Prabhupada makes an interesting point right at the beginning of the purport. I just talked about our psychophysical nature. But Prabhupada says it's not just a question of embodied life, of your psychophysical nature, but actually it's the nature of the soul to be always active. So that's taking it a step further. On one hand, the body and the mind, they have their natures, and pretty much you cannot stop them. But then on top of that, it's also the nature of the soul to be always active. Prabhupada explains elsewhere, not in the purport, let me just read this little a sentence or two. We saw a signboard in a yoga society in Los Angeles that said, "You become silent and you'll become God. And here Krishna says that you cannot become silent even for a moment. These are extremely important foundational points in the whole Bhagavad Gita. So, therefore, as Prabhupada says, if you look down 2 or 3 sentences, as such, the spirit soul has to be engaged in the good work of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it will be engaged in occupations dictated by illusory energy. Yes. So basically what Prabhupada goes on to say that generally people have to become purified through performing varnashram karma kandya gradually. But Prabhupada then emphasizes that ideally we can just engage directly in Krishna conscious activity. Yeah. And if we can do that nicely, it will be better. And Prabhupada quotes Srimad Bhagavatam 1:15-17. You see there the verse which is quoted in the middle of the purport. If someone takes to Krishna consciousness, even though he may not follow the prescribed duties in the Shastras or execute the devotional service properly, and even though he may fall down from the standard, there is no loss or evil for him. But if he carries out all the injunctions for purification in the Shastras, means karma kandya, varnashram, these material things. But if he carries out all the injunctions for purification in the Shastras, what does it avail him? How does it help him if he is not Krishna conscious? Yes. So we need Krishna consciousness and sannyas, this renunciation, stopping doing material duties. It may only be useful if it helps us become Krishna conscious, if it does. But it may also not, because we may not be ready for it. Aha. And here's another point from Srila Prabhupada. You'll find in India many saintly persons who observe silence. Prahlad Maharaj says, it is for the ajitendriyanam. This process, mauna, to become silent, is meant for persons who cannot control the senses. It is better not to talk than to talk rubbish. Many people think they will advance by not talking. If you ask a question, they'll reply in writing. Haribol. What is the difference between talking and writing? It's all sense gratification. And the fact is, you cannot stop the tongue working. Engage the tongue in Krishna consciousness only, and do not talk material subject matters. Aha. Okay. All right. I'll read the next verse and then we'll carry on with it on Monday. And it's Lord Krishna going more deeply into the same topic. This is verse 6. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So this is these artificial jnani, sannyasi, meditator, speculator, analytical type of people. They may try externally to not do like sinful activity, but the mind. The mind is elsewhere. And this is not really helping at all. In fact, it's misleading, dishonest. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.